The jungle doesn't forgive mistakes. It swallows them whole. November 7th, 1943. Bougainville. 05:46 hours. Staff Sergeant Samuel Griffin breathes shallow, his finger resting on a trigger that will rewrite the rules of war. But the weapon that will kill 112 men in 5 days isn't the Springfield rifle in his hands. It's the rusted soup can glinting in the morning sun 20 yards away. A piece of garbage that's about to become the deadliest psychological weapon in the Pacific. Across 600 yards of killing ground, a Japanese sniper makes his first mistake. His last mistake. The light flashes, the head rises, the bullet flies, and hell begins. November 7th, 1943, 05:40 hours. Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands. The jungle mist clung to Cape Torokina like a funeral shroud. Staff Sergeant Samuel Griffin lay motionless in the mud, his cheek pressed against the worn stock of his Springfield rifle, eye fixed to the 8-power scope. In his left hand, mounted on a crudely carved stick, sat something no military manual would ever prescribe as a weapon: a Campbell's soup can, both ends torn away, surface dented and catching the pre-dawn light. Through his scope, Griffin watched the tree line 600 yards distant, a tangle of vines and shadows where death waited, patient and invisible. The soup can stood planted in the earth 20 yards to his right, angled precisely where he'd calculated the night before. His mind mapping trajectories of light the way other men mapped trajectories of bullets. At 05:46 hours, the sun broke through. A brilliant flash of reflected light cut across the killing ground, aimed directly at a cluster of camouflaged palm fronds concealing a Japanese sniper nest. For 3 seconds, the reflection held. Then Griffin tilted the stick 1 degree. The light beam danced. 600 yards away, human nature betrayed tactical discipline. A Japanese observer shifted to investigate the strange, impossible light. Just a slight rise of the head, a fraction of movement above the sandbag revetment. Griffin Springfield spoke once. The figure dropped. The first kill of what would become the most devastating psychological warfare operation in the Pacific Theater had just occurred. Before the next 5 days ended, Staff Sergeant Griffin would use variations of his soup can deception to eliminate 112 confirmed enemy combatants, shatter an entire Japanese sniper network, and rewrite Marine Corps counter-sniper doctrine with nothing more than discarded ration tins and tactical genius. What began as a moment of desperate inspiration, born from watching sunlight glint off a muddy canteen, would evolve into a systematic hunting method that left Japanese forces paranoid, paralyzed, and unable to distinguish real threats from phantoms. The rules of jungle warfare were being rewritten not through superior numbers or firepower, but through human ingenuity, weaponizing the enemy's own instincts against them. The mathematics of survival were changing. In Griffin's hands, a piece of trash had become more lethal than 1,000 bullets. But this story didn't begin in the blood-soaked mud of Bougainville. It began 8 months earlier, under the vast Montana sky, where a ranch boy first learned that the deadliest weapon isn't always the one you hold. It's the one your enemy never sees coming. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. If you're fascinated by the tactical innovations and psychological warfare techniques that decided battles in World War II, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We bring you the untold stories of ordinary soldiers who achieved extraordinary results through ingenuity and courage. Don't miss our upcoming videos on the hidden tactics that changed history. The journey to Cape Torokina began in March 1943 at Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Samuel Griffin, the second son of a Montana cattle rancher, had enlisted in December 1941 at age 20. 3 days after Pearl Harbor turned his quiet world upside down. His childhood tracking elk through the Bitterroot Mountains and shooting coyotes threatening the family herd had built an instinctive understanding of patience, wind calculation, and the psychology of prey that no military course could replicate. His platoon leader, First Lieutenant James Holloway, first noticed him during routine marksmanship qualification in April 1943. While other Marines fired in standard rhythm, Griffin paused between shots, compensating for a crosswind most shooters didn't register, adjusting for heat mirage they couldn't see. He scored a perfect 50 out of 50 at 500 yards with iron sights. Holloway approached him afterward. "You hunt before the war, Griffin?" "Elk mostly." "Some mule deer." "How far?" "Shot a bull elk at 680 yards with my father's 30-06 iron sights." 4 days later, Griffin received orders to scout sniper school at Camp Pendleton, California. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper Program in 1943 emphasized intelligence gathering and psychological dominance over pure killing efficiency. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Henderson ran the tactical psychology module with an iron fist and cold pragmatism. "Your rifle is your last resort," Henderson told each incoming class, pacing like a predator. "Your job is reconnaissance. You observe, you report how, you disappear. But when you do pull that trigger, you make it count for more than one body. You create fear. You create doubt. You make the enemy question every shadow, every sound, every glint of light." Griffin absorbed every word. Growing up in Montana had taught him that elk could remain frozen for hours, invisible in plain sight, then vanish at the smallest wrong move. He applied the same discipline to field exercises. During the final stalking exam, approach within 100 yards of instructors with binoculars without being spotted, Griffin completed the task in 7 hours. The instructors never detected him until he stood and signaled his position after taking his simulated shot. Henderson pulled him aside after graduation. "You're damn good, Griffin. Natural instincts, tactical patience. But here's what you need to understand." He leaned in close. "The Japanese aren't elk. They think. They adapt. They learn your patterns, and they'll kill you with them. The sniper who survives isn't the deadliest shot. He's the one the enemy can never figure out. The one who never does the same thing twice." Griffin never forgot those words. He deployed to the South Pacific in August 1943, assigned to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marine Division. The invasion of Empress Augusta Bay on November 1st brought 14,000 Marines crashing into fortified Japanese positions. By November 4th, they'd carved out a defensive perimeter, but at brutal cost. Griffin spent his first week in conventional combat, suppressing enemy bunkers and covering infantry advances. The jungle fought them as much as the Japanese did. Knee-deep mud, suffocating humidity, mosquitoes thick as smoke, and an enemy that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Then, on November 6th, everything changed. His spotter, PFC Johnny Miller, a wisecracking kid from Brooklyn who'd become Griffin's closest friend in the Pacific, took a round through the throat during a morning reconnaissance patrol. The shot came from somewhere in the canopy. No muzzle flash. No sound until Miller was already falling. Griffin held him as he died, watching the light fade from eyes that had been laughing at a stupid joke 30 seconds earlier. The sniper vanished into the jungle like smoke. That night, Griffin sat alone in his fighting hole, staring at the tree line where death lived and breathed. The rage was there, hot and violent, but beneath it ran something colder, something calculating. Henderson's words echoed. Never do the same thing twice. The Japanese snipers owned this jungle through invisibility and patience. They knew every shadow, every angle, every sound that didn't belong. So Griffin decided to teach them a new sound, a new light, a new fear. The next morning, as he watched sunlight catch the surface of a discarded canteen in the mud, inspiration struck with the force of revelation. And the soup can trick was born. The Griffin family ranch sat in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains, where winter came early and left late, and survival depended on reading signs most people never noticed. Samuel Griffin learned to shoot at 7, not for sport, but necessity. Coyotes didn't respect property lines, and elk didn't wait for perfect conditions. His father, a man of few words and fewer wasted movements, taught him that patience killed more game than speed ever would. "The mountain doesn't care about your schedule," he'd say, glassing distant ridgelines at dawn. "You wait for the shot. You don't force it." By 15, Griffin could read wind drift by watching grass bend 200 yards out. He understood how temperature inversion affected bullet trajectory, how mirage patterns revealed thermal currents, how an elk's ear twitch predicted movement 3 seconds before it happened. These weren't lessons from books. They were survival skills coded into muscle memory through 1,000 frozen mornings and empty-handed evenings. The morning Pearl Harbor burned, Griffin was tracking a wounded buck through fresh snow. He found it just before sunset, made the kill clean and quick, then walked 6 miles home in darkness. His father met him at the door with the radio crackling behind him, his face carved from stone. 3 days later, Griffin enlisted. Marine Corps marksmanship qualification was designed to identify competent riflemen. Griffin made it look like target practice. April 1943, Camp Lejeune Rifle Range. While other recruits fired in mechanical rhythm, Griffin paused between shots, waiting for gusts to pass, compensating for barrel heat, adjusting for humidity shifts the instructors hadn't mentioned. When First Lieutenant Holloway reviewed the scores and saw a perfect 50 at 500 yards, he assumed it was a recording error. Then, he watched Griffin shoot. "Most men fight the rifle," Holloway observed, studying him through binoculars. "You're having a conversation with it." Griffin didn't know how to explain that he wasn't shooting at targets. He was reading an environment, the same way he'd read Montana slopes for years. Wind wasn't an obstacle. It was information. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "Hunting, sir. Elk country." "How far?" "Shot a 6-point bull at 680 yards last season. Iron sights." Holloway's expression shifted. 4 days later, Griffin received orders to Scout Sniper School, Camp Pendleton, California, May 1943. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Henderson ran the tactical psychology module like a preacher delivering damnation. Tall, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much, he paced before each class with predatory intensity. "Listen close, because I'm only saying this once," Henderson growled. "Your rifle is not a solution. It's a last resort. Your job is intelligence gathering. You watch, you report, you become invisible. But when you do shoot..." He stopped, letting silence build. "You make it count for more than one body. You create fear. You plant doubt. You make every enemy soldier question every shadow, every sound, every goddamn breath they take." Griffin sat forward, absorbing every word. The final exam required stalking within 100 yards of instructors, equipped with binoculars and radios, in broad daylight, across open terrain. Most students failed. Griffin completed it in 7 hours, moving inches per minute, using shadows and depressions invisible to untrained eyes. The instructors never saw him until he stood and waved. Henderson pulled him aside after graduation, voice low and urgent. "You're good, Griffin. Natural instincts. But the Japanese aren't elk. They adapt, they learn. They'll study your patterns and kill you with them. He gripped Griffin's shoulder. The sniper who survives isn't the deadliest shot. He's the one the enemy can never figure out. The one who never does the same thing twice. Griffin carried those words to the Pacific like scripture. He just didn't know how soon he'd need them. November 1st, 1943, Empress Augusta Bay. The landing craft ramps dropped into chaos. Artillery screamed overhead. Machine gun fire stitched the beach in lethal patterns. Griffin hit the black volcanic sand running. Springfield clutched tight as 14,000 Marines poured ashore against entrenched Japanese positions that had been waiting weeks for this moment. By November 4th, they'd carved out a perimeter. The cost was written in blood and dog tags. But the real nightmare didn't announce itself with explosions. It whispered from the tree line in the language of sudden death. Bougainville wasn't a battlefield. It was a green hell designed to devour men slowly. Mud sucked at boots with every step, thick as cement and smelling of rot. Humidity turned the air into soup you could barely breathe. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds so dense they blackened exposed skin. The jungle canopy blocked sunlight, turning day into perpetual twilight where shadows moved and nothing was certain. And somewhere in that tangle of vines and darkness, Japanese snipers waited. They operated from tree platforms 20 feet up, invisible against the canopy. From spider holes camouflaged so perfectly, you could step on one before seeing it. From nests woven into palm fronds where a man could remain motionless for 12 hours, watching, waiting for one Marine to make one mistake. Griffin's unit lost 3 men in the first 2 days. Clean headshots, no warning. The bodies dropped before anyone heard the crack of the rifle. Mata. They own this jungle, PFC Johnny Miller muttered, scanning the tree line through his spotting scope. We're just visiting. Miller was a wisecracking kid from Brooklyn, 19 years old with a mouth that never stopped and instincts that had kept them both alive through 3 previous engagements. He spotted. Griffin shot. They'd developed a rhythm, a trust built in the spaces between heartbeats where decisions meant life or death. See that cluster of fronds, 11 o'clock, 30 yards up? Miller whispered. Griffin tracked it through his scope. Nest? Either that or the world's ugliest bird. Movement 3 minutes ago. Nothing since. They watched for 20 minutes. No movement, no confirmation. Could be empty, Griffin finally said. Could be a guy who knows how to hold still. Miller shifted position, wiping sweat from his eyes. These bastards are good, Sam. Real good. Patient as death. Griffin knew Miller was right. These weren't conscripts or green troops. These were experienced marksmen who understood jungle warfare better than any Marine manual. They knew the terrain. They knew the angles. They knew how to exploit every advantage nature provided. The jungle had become a chessboard, where pieces disappeared without warning, where every move carried mortal weight, where the enemy saw you long before you saw them. We need to change the game, Griffin said quietly. How? They're ghosts. Ghosts still need to see to shoot. They still need to move to reposition. Miller glanced at him. You got something cooking in that Montana brain? Working on it. But Griffin didn't have an answer yet. Just the beginning of an idea. Something about visibility, about forcing movement, about making ghosts reveal themselves. He just needed the right trigger. The jungle had rules. Griffin was starting to think about breaking them. November 6th, 1943, 0620 hours. The morning started like any other, which should have been the first warning. Griffin and Miller moved through the jungle on a routine reconnaissance sweep. part of a four-man patrol mapping Japanese positions along the eastern perimeter. The mission was simple: observe, record, don't engage. Standard procedure that had kept them alive for 5 days. Miller was 20 feet ahead, moving through a gap in the undergrowth, when he stopped to check something in the canopy. He turned back toward Griffin, mouth opening to say something, probably a joke, knowing Miller. When the shot came, no muzzle flash, no warning, just the wet crack of impact. Miller's eyes went wide with surprise, not pain. His hand moved to his throat where blood was already fountaining between his fingers. He tried to speak, but only managed a choked gurgle as his knees buckled. Griffin was moving before Miller hit the ground, covering the distance in 3 strides, catching him as he fell. He pressed his hands against the wound, trying to stem the flow, but arterial blood pumped hot and fast through his fingers. "Stay with me, Johnny. Stay with me." Miller's eyes found his, clear and terrified and already fading. His lips moved. No sound came out. Just blood. Griffin held him as the light died. 30 seconds, start to finish. One moment Miller was alive, talking, breathing, real, and the next he was weight and stillness and gone. The sniper never fired again. Didn't need to. The message was delivered. The patrol carried Miller's body back in silence. Griffin said nothing during the debriefing. Nothing when the chaplain offered condolences. Nothing when they wrapped Miller in canvas and added him to the list of names that kept growing. He sat alone that night in his fighting hole, Miller's blood still crusted under his fingernails, staring at the tree line where death lived and breathed. The other Marines whispered about the kill. Too clean, too professional. One shot from an invisible position, then ghost-like disappearance. Intelligence reports mentioned a Japanese sniper operating in the sector. Elite trained, methodical, with a growing reputation among the enemy ranks. They called him the Raven. 13 confirmed American kills in 2 weeks. Each one a demonstration of perfect fieldcraft and inhuman patience. Some said he was a legend, a myth meant to demoralize Allied forces. Griffin knew better. Myths didn't put bullets through your best friend's throat. Something changed in Griffin that night. The grief was there, sharp and bleeding, but beneath it ran something colder, something surgical. He began studying patterns. Where the Japanese snipers positioned themselves, how they rotated positions, what angles they favored, what time of day they operated. He mapped firing solutions, calculated sight lines, documented every environmental factor Henderson had taught him to consider. But he also studied something else. What made men reveal themselves? What broke discipline? What exploited the gap between training and instinct? The Japanese owned the jungle through invisibility and patience. They were better trained, better positioned, and they knew this terrain intimately. So Griffin stopped trying to beat them at their game. He started inventing a new one. Henderson's words echoed through the darkness. The sniper who survives is the one the enemy can never figure out. Miller deserved better than grief. He deserved vengeance served cold and calculated. And the Raven? The Raven would learn that ghosts could be hunted too, if you knew how to make them visible. November 7th, 1943, 0530 hours. Griffin sat in his fighting hole as dawn crept across the perimeter, mind cycling through the same calculations he'd run 1,000 times. Sight lines, wind patterns, enemy positions. Nothing new, nothing actionable. Just the same impossible equation: how do you kill what you can't see? Then sunlight broke through the canopy, and everything changed. A discarded canteen lay half buried in the mud 15 yards out. Some Marine had dropped it during yesterday's mortar attack. The morning sun caught its metal surface at precisely the right angle, throwing a brilliant flash of reflected light directly into Griffin's eyes. He blinked, turned away from the glare, then stopped. His mind made the connection instantly, rewiring months of training into a single devastating insight. If light could blind him, it could distract the enemy. If it could distract, it could force movement. And movement revealed position. Griffin scavenged 3 empty soup cans from the mess area, dented Campbell's tins with both ends removed. Using spare wire and carved sticks, he mounted them at calculated angles beyond the tree line, positioned to catch sunlight and redirect it toward suspected Japanese observation points. At 0546 hours, he waited for the sun to rise high enough. The first flash cut across the jungle clearing like a signal flare, aimed at a cluster of palm fronds 70 yards out. Griffin watched through his scope, finger resting lightly on the trigger. For 15 seconds, nothing happened. Then curiosity overcame training. A Japanese observer shifted position to investigate the strange, impossible light. Just the slightest rise of a head above concealment, trying to understand what the flash meant. Griffin Springfield spoke once. The figure collapsed. He refined the method throughout the morning. Multiple cans at different angles, varying the flash duration, moving the light beam to create the illusion of movement or signaling, testing what provoked response and what didn't. By noon, 2 more enemy snipers had exposed themselves. Both fell to Griffin's calculated shots. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. Human nature made men curious. Curiosity created small movements. Small movements revealed position, and revealed positions meant death. Word spread through the Marine lines like wildfire. Griffin's doing something weird with soup cans. Killed 3 Japs this morning with goddamn trash. Light tricks or some shit. They can't figure out what he's doing. Lieutenant Holloway watched through binoculars as Griffin adjusted another can, then dropped a 4th enemy sniper who'd shifted to investigate a coordinated series of flashes. "What the hell is he doing?" a sergeant asked. Holloway lowered his binoculars, expression caught between disbelief and admiration. He's turning their own eyes against them, making them look where he wants them to look. That night, Griffin sat cleaning his rifle, analyzing the day's results with cold precision. The Japanese were disciplined, patient, nearly invisible. But they were still human. They still had to observe to engage. They still relied on vision to identify threats. And vision could be manipulated. Light created curiosity. Curiosity created movement. Movement created targets. Henderson had taught him that the sniper who survives never does the same thing twice. But Griffin realized something deeper. The sniper who dominates makes the enemy react predictably to unpredictable stimuli. He wasn't hunting anymore. He was conducting experiments, and the jungle was his laboratory. 4 kills in 1 day, 12 hours of work. He had 5 more days to perfect the method, and 108 more deaths to deliver. November 9th, 1943, 0600 hours. The flashes stopped working. Griffin deployed his soup can array at dawn, angling reflections toward known observation points. He waited. Adjusted angles, waited longer. Nothing. No movement. No curious heads rising above cover. The Japanese had adapted. Intelligence reports confirmed it by midday. Enemy commanders had identified the light flashes as deliberate traps. New orders circulated through Japanese positions. Ignore isolated glints, don't investigate unusual reflections, maintain absolute discipline. Griffin's innovation had bought him 48 hours and 19 kills. Now the enemy had learned. Most snipers would have abandoned the tactic. Griffin saw it as evolution in progress. If single flashes looked like traps, coordinated patterns would look like legitimate activity. He spent November 9th building a deception network that spanned 200 yards of perimeter. 15 soup cans positioned at calculated intervals, each angled to create synchronized flashes that mimicked Marine squad movements. Advancing positions, flanking maneuvers, command post signals. But light alone wasn't enough anymore. Griffin needed sound. He scavenged a damaged field radio and positioned it 30 yards beyond the tree line, rigged to emit bursts of static and garbled transmissions at irregular intervals. To Japanese observers, it would suggest a forward command position, a high-value target worth investigating. Then he added the final layer. Ration tins hung on vines and tripwires, creating metallic clinks and rustles that sounded like equipment movement, soldiers repositioning, activity that demanded reconnaissance. At 1400 hours, he activated the entire system. Coordinated light flashes suggesting a 3-squad advance. Radio chatter indicating command presence. Sound cues implying troop concentration. The Japanese response was immediate and predictable. 2 observers shifted position to assess the apparent Marine movement. A forward scout crawled closer to investigate the radio signals. A sniper repositioned to cover what looked like a developing assault. Griffin dropped all 4 within 90 seconds. November 10th brought refinement. Night operations using sound traps exclusively, no light. Just carefully positioned tins that rattled with wind shifts or when tripwires were disturbed. Japanese patrols investigating the noises exposed themselves against starlit backgrounds. 3 more kills before dawn. Day operations using increasingly complex deception patterns. Fake sentry calls. Coordinated conflashes timed to suggest mortar spotter activity. Audio cues mimicking wounded Marines calling for corpsmen. Cruel, effective bait that exploited the enemy's tactical doctrine of eliminating isolated casualties. The body count climbed. 27, 34, 41. Marines started calling the eastern perimeter Griffin's hunting ground. By November 11th, the psychological impact became visible through captured intelligence reports and prisoner interrogations. Japanese snipers were hesitating, second-guessing, reporting phantom American movements that didn't exist. Some refused to reposition even under direct orders, convinced any movement would be met with instant death. Morale wasn't just eroding, it was disintegrating into paranoia. One prisoner, a seasoned marksman, described the situation through a translator. "We cannot tell real from false. Every light could be trap. Every sound could be deception. The American ghost makes the jungle itself hunt us." Griffin absorbed the report without satisfaction. This wasn't about pride, it was about mathematics. Every enemy sniper paralyzed by paranoia was one less threat to Marine lives. Every hesitation he created bought seconds his brothers could use to advance. Every kill removed an expert marksman from a network that had bled his unit for days. Henderson had taught him that psychological impact mattered more than body count. Griffin was proving the lesson at scale. But he knew the Japanese would send their best eventually. Elite didn't hesitate. Elite adapted faster. And somewhere in that jungle, the Raven was watching, learning, waiting. November 11th, 1943, 0500 hours. Griffin spent the entire night preparing his most ambitious deception yet. A coordinated operation spanning 400 yards of perimeter that would simulate a full battalion-strength assault. 20 soup cans positioned at precise intervals across the killing ground, each angled to catch dawn light at calculated moments, creating sequential flashes that would mimic the systematic advance of multiple Marine squads moving in tactical formation. sound components layered throughout, radio chatter suggesting command coordination, ration tins rigged to create movement noise, even helmets mounted on sticks, positioned in to cast human-shaped shadows when backlit by sunrise. It wasn't a trap anymore. It was theater. And Griffin was directing every scene. At 0547 hours, the sun broke through the canopy. The first can caught light, flashing toward Japanese positions. 3 seconds later, the second can fired its reflection. Then the third, fourth, fifth. From enemy observation points, it looked exactly like what Griffin intended. A coordinated Marine advance, multiple elements moving in concert, preparing for a major push into Japanese-held territory. The response was immediate and catastrophic. Japanese troops surged forward to intercept what they believed was a significant American offensive. Officers barking orders, soldiers breaking from concealed positions, defenders rushing to reinforce what looked like the main assault axis. They ran straight into pre-sighted Marine kill zones. Machine gun fire erupted across the perimeter. Mortar rounds bracketed enemy positions. Infantry squads that had been waiting in ambush opened up with devastating effect. And through his scope, Griffin worked with surgical precision. Japanese officers coordinating the counterattack, squad leaders directing troop movement, runners carrying orders between positions. Every target chosen for maximum disruption, maximum chaos. His Springfield barked steadily, methodically. One shot, adjust, breathe. One shot, adjust, breathe. The mathematics of death rendered in perfect rhythm. By 800 hours, the Japanese defensive line had fractured completely. Units withdrew in disarray, abandoning positions they'd held for weeks. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Soldiers broke discipline and ran rather than hold ground against an attack that had never actually come. Griffin's personal count for the morning, 32 confirmed kills in less than 3 hours. The Marines couldn't believe it. "Jesus Christ," Lieutenant Holloway whispered, watching through binoculars as Japanese forces retreated across the eastern sector. He didn't just break their line, he shattered their nerve. Sergeant Harris stood nearby, expression caught between awe and something closer to fear. "That's not sniping anymore, sir. I don't even know what to call it." "Psychological warfare," Holloway said quietly. "The kind that wins battles without firing 1,000 rounds." Griffin sat cleaning his rifle as Marines streamed past, preparing to exploit the breakthrough his deception had created. Some nodded respectfully. Others stared like they couldn't quite reconcile the quiet Montana ranch kid with the predator who just orchestrated a tactical collapse. He didn't acknowledge them. His focus remained internal, analytical. The operation had proven the concept at scale. Properly orchestrated deception could multiply combat effectiveness exponentially. One sniper, armed with discarded trash and tactical psychology, had achieved what an artillery barrage might have failed to accomplish. But the cost registered too. 32 more faces he'd seen through the scope. 32 more men who'd never go home. He pushed the thought down. There would be time for reckoning later. The Japanese were withdrawing, but they weren't broken yet. And somewhere in that retreating chaos, the Raven was still alive, still hunting, still waiting for Griffin to make one mistake. November 12, 1943, 0500 hours, intelligence confirmed it at midnight. The Raven had been deployed to Griffin's sector with explicit orders. Eliminate the American sniper disrupting Japanese operations. Griffin received the news without reaction. He'd been expecting this since Miller died. The mathematics were inevitable. Push hard enough, hurt them badly enough, and eventually they send their best. He just hadn't expected to feel relief when they finally did. Griffin spent the hours before dawn constructing his most elaborate deception, not to kill dozens, but to draw out one specific hunter. The mock command post sat 40 yards beyond the perimeter. A framework of branches arranged to suggest a covered position, a helmet visible at the edge, scattered equipment creating the silhouette of an officer's station. Radio chatter played at low volume, garbled transmissions suggesting tactical coordination. The fake sentry call came at irregular intervals. A voice Griffin mimicked himself, calling challenges into the darkness like a nervous Marine pulling watch. And the soup can, one single can, positioned with absolute precision to catch the first ray of sunrise and throw reflected light directly across the command post in a sweeping arc. The kind of accidental exposure a careless officer might allow. Everything designed to suggest one thing: a high-value target making amateur mistakes. Bait for a predator who'd been studying Griffin's methods for days. 05:47 hours. Sunrise. The can caught light and flashed exactly as calculated, illuminating the mock command post in brilliant detail. Griffin lay 70 yards away in a depression he'd prepared the night before, camouflaged so thoroughly even the Raven's legendary fieldcraft wouldn't detect him. His scope swept the tree line, 700 yards out, where patience met opportunity, where a sniper of the Raven's skill would position for maximum advantage. Silence stretched. 1 minute, 2, 5. Griffin's heartbeat slowed. His breathing became mechanical, every muscle locked into stillness that transcended discipline and approached meditation. Then, movement. Not obvious, not careless. Just the faintest shift of shadow against light, 712 yards distant in the canopy. The subtle geometry of a rifle muzzle silhouette adjusting angle, preparing to fire on what the Raven believed was a legitimate command target. 1 second of exposure, maybe less. Griffin's finger compressed the trigger in a smooth, practiced motion. The Springfield roared. The recoil familiar as breathing. Through the scope, he watched the distant figure fall. No second shot. No confirmation needed. 700 to 12 yards through jungle humidity and uncertain wind. But Griffin knew the truth in his bones the same way he'd known when that Montana elk dropped 6 years ago. The Raven was dead. Griffin didn't move for 10 minutes. Protocol dictated waiting, confirming, ensuring no follow-up threat existed. But that wasn't why he remained frozen in position. He was remembering Miller's face, the surprise in his eyes, the blood pumping between fingers, the light dying. This kill should have felt like justice, like balance restored. Instead, it felt like closing a wound that would never fully heal, necessary, final, but leaving scar tissue that would ache for the rest of his life. The Raven had killed his best friend. Griffin had just killed the man responsible. But Miller was still dead. And so was the Raven. And so were the 100+ others Griffin had dropped over 5 days of warfare that rewrote doctrine but couldn't rewrite grief. He rose slowly, slinging his rifle, and walked back toward the perimeter. Marines would celebrate this kill. Intelligence would confirm the Raven's death and call it a major victory. Griffin felt nothing but weight. The duel was over. The wound was closed. But healing? That was a different war entirely. November 15th, 1943, 0530 hours. Griffin woke to darkness that shouldn't exist at dawn. Thick tropical clouds had rolled in overnight, smothering the sun completely. No light, no reflections, no flashes. His primary weapon, the soup can trick that had killed over 100 men in 5 days, was suddenly useless. Most snipers would have waited for conditions to improve. Griffin had learned long ago that nature didn't care about your tactics. You adapted or you died. He spent 2 hours rigging his final trap using only sound. Ration tins hung on vines at varying heights, positioned to swing and clank with the slightest breeze. Tripwires stretched across probable approach routes, each connected to suspended metal that would ring like bells when disturbed. Empty canteens arranged to create hollow echoes when wind channeled through them. And at the center, a fabricated tactical error. Griffin mimicked radio chatter suggesting a coordination meeting, officers gathering to plan the next phase of operations. He made it sound hurried, poorly concealed, the kind of intelligence opportunity an aggressive enemy would exploit. At 0847 hours, through his scope, Griffin watched a Japanese officer move cautiously toward the sound, a coordination officer, based on the satchel of maps and the way other soldiers deferred to him. The officer paused, listening, trying to reconcile the sounds with the apparent radio activity. Griffin Springfield spoke one final time. The officer collapsed, and with him, the last thread of organized Japanese resistance in the sector unraveled completely. Final count: 112 confirmed kills across 5 days. The number was documented, verified by multiple witnesses, and entered into official after-action reports. Marine Corps Command called it unprecedented. Tactical analysts studied Griffin's methods for integration into sniper doctrine. Staff Sergeant Samuel Griffin received the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, and a field promotion. Photographers captured him shaking hands with commanding officers. Journalists wrote stories about the Soupcan trick that changed Pacific warfare. He said all the right things publicly, thanked his training, credited his instructors, honored the Marines who fought beside him. Privately, he began praying. Every morning, Griffin prayed for the 112 men whose faces he remembered through his scope. Japanese soldiers who had families, who had been trained and deployed and killed by a ranch kid from Montana, using discarded trash and tactical psychology. The nightmares came later. Always the same. Miller's eyes fading, then 112 faces appearing one after another, asking why. Stateside, 1946. Griffin turned down recruitment offers, propaganda tours, book deals. Instead, he took an instructor position at Scout Sniper School, the same place Gunnery Sergeant Henderson had taught him that survival meant unpredictability. But Griffin taught something different. "Your rifle is your last resort," he told each class, pacing the same way Henderson once had. "Before you pull that trigger, you think. You innovate. You find solutions that don't require killing if possible. And when you do kill..." He paused, letting weight settle. "You remember. Every single one. Because the moment you stop remembering is the moment you stop being human." He taught the soup can trick, the deception networks, the psychological warfare tactics that had entered official Marine Corps doctrine. But he also taught restraint, conscience, the cost of every bullet that finds its mark. The soup can trick saved countless Marine lives by neutralizing enemy snipers efficiently and decisively. It represented innovation under pressure, tactical genius applied to impossible circumstances. But Griffin never forgot what Henderson had warned him. The sniper who survives isn't the deadliest. He's the one the enemy can never figure out. Griffin had figured out the enemy. He'd outsmarted them, outmaneuvered them, eliminated 112 of them in 5 days. And every morning for the rest of his life, he prayed for their souls. Because the true weapon was never the soup can gleaming in tropical sunlight. It was the mind that could turn trash into death, and the heart that carried the weight of every life it took. That was Samuel Griffin's real legacy. Not the kills, but the cost he paid for them. and the reminder that brilliance in warfare always comes with a price, measured in memory, conscience, and prayers whispered into darkness.